we get a breaking news video that gets sent to us. Okay, well, we had to talk to our lawyers before we released it. Valuetainment broke this video just earlier today, a couple hours ago. Before we did, we emailed General McChrystal, because it's General McChrystal in the video talking about Nord Stream pipeline, okay, and what happened to it. Nord Stream pipeline, a lot of people are saying, well, it was, Ukraine did it. No, it was Russians did it. Putin, no, who did it? Now, General McChrystal, to be fair, this is not a regular person. He's not a sergeant. He's not a captain. He's a 4-star general. I've interviewed him 7 years ago. We had a very good conversation together. And so we emailed him to let him know, do you have any comments on it? I don't believe we got a response back from him. We'll play the clip, and I know you've spoken about this a lot. I want to get your reaction on this. So here is General McChrystal, and a gentleman in D.C. got this footage in D.C., sends this video over to us. If you can play this clip.
There's no obvious better solution in Russia. I think Putin ought to go, but there's nobody that I'm aware of standing on the wings.
It seems like there's a lot more radical people standing on the wings too, which is concerning. Like, remember the whole Nord Stream thing? Like, in the beginning of that, I was like, oh yeah, Russia did it, but I don't know. Who do you think did that?
My son is the leader of the energy team at DIA. He didn't think the Russians did it. Defense intelligence.
Okay. So
he
like
didn't
CIA,
think that
DIA, except for
Ukrainians
defense.
officially did it either. I mean, there are people who benefited from it, and that was people who produced natural gas around the world.
Listen.
So if you really want to get conspiracies,
Some corporate.
the United States made more money off that deal than anybody else.
Benefits, right?
But that's, because we were huge beneficiaries, and we changed our policy. We started providing liquid natural gas, overseas, and, there's no...
I don't know if you guys realize what he just said right there. So a 4-star general. My interpretation, I want to get yours, Dave. Interpretation, America was behind, possibly, Nord Stream pipeline, coming from a 4-star general who worked under Obama, by the way, just so everybody knows. So I'm going to give it up to you if you want to give a little bit of context behind the story.
Yeah, well, if people don't know, General McChrystal was in charge of the war in Afghanistan under Barack Obama, and he was the head guy, like before Petraeus took it over. This was his war. Or after Petraeus took it over. Anyway, he was the guy. They had a falling out. He was the guy who got interviewed in that Rolling Stone piece, and he got drunk with the reporter and started just like trashing Obama. And then he published all of it, and then he had to resign because, like, you're really not supposed to do that when you're a 4-star general talking about your commander-in-chief, which is kind of an interesting insight into how some of the top military brass actually look at the president. There's obviously a lot of evidence when Donald Trump was president, too, that a lot of these people don't really feel like they work for the commander-in-chief, which is disturbing in its own way. But what he's talking about here is the Nord Stream pipelines. I assume most of you guys know what this is. It's a natural gas pipeline that was built from Russia to Germany, and it was blown up late last year. They tried to blame it on Russia. It made absolutely no sense that this was Russia. Germany had basically agreed in part of the Western effort to support Ukraine that they wouldn't use the pipeline. But so Putin blowing it up is just blowing up his own pipeline. He can close it from his end. There'd be no benefit to him. But there's an enormous benefit to Ukraine and the West, because the big fear was that it was going into winter. Germany's having a lot of energy problems because they've embraced these insane climate change policies. And so they were worried that the Germans might break in the winter and agree to start getting some of this natural gas from Putin again. If they're dependent on him for natural gas, how much resolve are they going to have to keep supporting this war with Ukraine? So it's not just the issues that he's talking about that, okay, this also benefits all these other oil companies. Look, who had the means, motive, and opportunity to do this? It's pretty obvious who it is. There was also Sal Hirsch, who had a great bit of reporting on this, that it was absolutely America who blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. Just to be clear, if that's true, this is an act of industrial terrorism against a NATO ally who we're sworn to, defend if they're attacked. And I hope it at least opens people's eyes up to, like, it's not so clear. Like, look, I love America. I just hate our government. So just to be clear on that, I just hate politicians. That they are not the good guys in this conflict. It's not as simple, and wars are never as simple as like Russia bad, Ukraine good, America good, Europe good for helping them. There's a lot more to this conflict than that. Good guys don't, commit environmental terrorism to one of their closest allies. And the truth, this is what I've been talking about for a long time, but if you look into the history of this whole conflict, Vladimir Putin is actually absolutely wrong for invading. The war is illegal, and it's horrible, and a lot of people are dying. But Vladimir Putin was absolutely provoked for decades by the West, who, after winning the Cold War, were the sorest of winners and just did nothing but try to degrade and humiliate and poke and prod the Russians. There was a long plan, largely driven by neoconservatives. You can go read about it in their Project for a New American Century back in the 90s, where their attitude was basically like, instead of what even a lot of the great Cold Warriors, like George Kennan, who was the founder of the containment strategy, who was fighting the Soviet Union. His idea was, once the Soviet Union fell, it was like, oh, this is wonderful. You guys aren't communists anymore. You overthrew your communists. Now you can have freedom. Now we can all be friends. And the neoconservatives went, no, now they're weak. Now's when we take over the world. And they used to draw the line down the middle of Germany, okay? And West Germany was with the West, and East Germany was with the Soviet bloc. And that was how Europe was split. And now we've expanded NATO all the way up to Russia's borders. NATO is now taking over the entire.
Too close.
And they might, from what the establishment people will say is they'll go, what? This is just a defensive alliance. NATO. No, and they are a defensive alliance, except for all of the times that they fight aggressive wars. If you overlook that stuff, like Putin's army is only defensive, except for when it invades Ukraine. And so basically, in 2008, it was announced that Ukraine would be joining NATO. This is what really sent us all down this path. This has been Putin's red line forever, that you can't go any further.
Because it's like having your enemy as your neighbor.
Yeah, they're a very strategic input. Look, from Putin's perspective, NATO is not a defensive alliance.
Right.
NATO is the European arm of the American military empire. And from his perspective, he's like, I cannot have you taking over Ukraine. There's just too many vital strategic interests here. I can't have all this hardware, military hardware, right on my border. In 1962, when the Soviets put nuclear weapons into Cuba, Jack Kennedy said, that is unacceptable.
Too close.
It is an act of war for you to have nukes this close to us, and I will blow up the world. That was literally what he said. I will blow up the world if you don't move these nukes off of here. And then they got on the phone behind closed doors and they negotiated. And the Soviets pulled their nukes back, and we pulled some nukes back in Europe. And we saved the world. And the fact that we haven't been from day one of this conflict saying, okay, let's negotiate what the deal is here. Okay, how about we pull our NATO hardware back a little bit, and Putin, you pull your military back a little bit. And instead, the Biden administration's policy has been, we will fund this war till the end of time. Like, why? Why is that in America's interest?
It's not.
Luhansk must be ruled by Kiev, not Moscow.
By the way, the biggest
how many of you really passionately care about that?
Or Mike Pence is not of his concern.
Listen, man, as far as I'm concerned, and Ron DeSantis was a heroic governor during COVID, and he took on the world, and he did a very good job for you guys, but he's just nowhere near good enough on this issue. He's just waffling on it whenever he's talked about, oh, the problem is the mission is ill-defined. The problem is that we're involved at all. Trump has been phenomenal when he's talking about this issue. Vivek Ramaswamy has been phenomenal, and RFK has just been unbelievable on this issue. It's a proxy war of choice on the border of the country with the largest nuclear stockpile in the history of the world. I couldn't think of a more insane, reckless policy for zero strategic advantage. And all it's doing is continuing the dying.
So if you like this clip and you want to watch another one, click right here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click right here.